Well, hello there. Not often you see a Raptearer video coming out, but given how things are kind of going in the LCS, I figured this would be a good way to get my thoughts out without a million long tweets everyone had to read, or a twit longer where I have to try to convey tone in text, which is always difficult. So, uh, talking today, of course, about the LCS for 2024. So, for those of you that don't know, this is basically what happened. The owners met together, the teams did with Riot. They took a vote and decided for 2024 that there will only be 8 teams in the league and that EG and Golden Guardians will both be removed and leaving the league. Um, whether or not they got paid out, whether something else happened, like whether like there was any other contract negotiations. Riot's been tight-lipped about. They're not going to talk about it. I can't imagine the orgs will talk about it. Maybe Golden State will down the line. Their owner seems like a guy that would, but I mean EG can't because they're basically collapsing. So we're going to talk about it because this is bad but good, and I think looking and trying to understand it and will help explain why it's bad this is happening, but also looking at the history of American sports as a whole and the path the LCS has gone down so far, why I actually have like a lot of hope for the future for this. Um, Now, obviously, the one of like million videos coming out about this around. Oh boy, it's 8:42 right now. Cool. Um, but I still wanted to get my thoughts out there. It's not something I do very often, but I see so much doom and gloom about esports and tech nowadays, and might as well. I got nothing else to do tonight. I'm off work, so we're just gonna jump right into it. So again, this is Josh Needham, President Esports Riot, who announced it. Said, they thanked them, said that they're very eager to outline their full global strategy, that they're kind of reorganizing the LCS. I know a lot of people have taken this as a sign of they want to move towards more of what the VCT had than anything else. But that's not confirmed yet. And I think it varies a little bit. And I think Riot is going to keep the franchise league. That's very first and foremost. Like, I don't see franchise going anywhere. Um, the reason Riot went with the model they did with Valorant is that they're trying really hard to kind of capture the CS scene, and the CS scene's reluctance around franchising, I think, made them think, okay, we want to do this because it's good for the orgs and helps everyone out financially, but we can't go 100% on it because of, the CS community doesn't want that. And more so that Riot, I think, was trying to learn some lessons from the LCS, and that restructuring it, I don't think that's going to mean the franchise has gone entirely. It could. I mean, Riot could announce tomorrow that they switch to a VCT style model so they can kick out groups like Immortals and Dignitas, who, at least especially Immortals, feeds. It's my personal opinion, but I feel like they kind of like barely exist as an organization. They don't really do a lot. So we're to start, by focusing on the 2 teams and what's wrong with this. So what's wrong like why this is bad? I mean, the league's shrinking. The esports is in the east is what we call the esports winner. Personally, I think it's more of a tech winner. Tech as a whole is struggling right now. The age of unlimited VC capital, venture funds, and investment, I think, is starting to go away. I think people are now like, okay, it's been 15, 20 years of this at this point of people trying to build the next big tech thing. I think actually, I want to say back since at least 2010, the 13 years of just tech blowing up. And I think companies and investors are realizing some of these things are not going to have or are going to take a very long time to get a return on investment. So esports is, especially hit hard by this because it's entertainment, and entertainment is always going to be something that, when push comes to shove, will get cut first when it comes to financials. And the LCS has been struggling a little bit of viewership. The other leagues have been doing very well. It's been very resilient, and with things like the collapse of the Overwatch League, and the selling of that all off to ESL, the struggles with several other scenes that have just kind of started collapsing. Hearthstone's kind of going under. Games like Siege have been seeing kind of declines. I don't quote me on those numbers, but I've heard a lot less about Siege in the last couple of years than I had before, and it's seen, the death of heroes a couple of years ago, or it's been almost 10 years. No, 8. No, it's been about 5-6 years. So you've been seeing leagues start to decline, but also you're seeing orgs pull out of a lot of games. You're seeing a lot of teams go under because the money's just not there anymore, and stability is important, and the rapid expansion into everything that had a pulse isn't working anymore. So the LCS has kind of felt a little impervious to this. It's kind of where I've been going. Outside of the viewership decline, it's kind of felt like the LCS, it's still going to be here no matter what. Worst case, a team will sell. But this, it is very concerning and worrying because Work's just basically up and collapsed. Golden Guardians, as they said in the Travis Gafford video, go check that out. I'll probably link it in the description of this on YouTube if I can get that all figured out. But basically, they just want to spend their money on their team, on Golden State Warriors. And Golden State as a team is very expensive. So I'm gonna hop back over. Do I still have it up? Oh, I don't think I left it up. Dang. But we're gonna pull this back up. So I'm gonna pull this up. Golden State Warriors budget. So we're gonna look at Spot Track, and we're gonna go down to the luxury tax total. So something to know about the NBA is that there is a tax and a cap on. It's called the luxury tax. Basically, it's a cap. There's a cap on how much you can spend on salary, which you can see down here. The salary cap is about 136 million. That's about where you can go to, and there's weird things you can do to get you over that and get you into a space where you're not spend where you can go over the cap if you've got something going with a player. Maybe you picked up a new recruit, so that you developed homegrown talent, or you're picking up an injured player or something. I don't know the exact specifics. I don't watch the NBA that closely, but I know enough about it that there is a cap, and if you go over the cap, there's a tax you have to pay. Then the hard cap threshold for this last year, or for this year, is 165 million. Right here, 165,294,000. The the total cap that Golden State has is 226 million. So and of that, the part that can be taxed on the luxury tax threshold is 207 million. So they're still 42 million over their cap space, and the estimated tax they have to pay on that is $192 million. Again, this is an estimate. The very specifics of that are kind of kept in the back end there, but that's about what the expectation is that they're paying. So Golden State is spending a massive amount of money, and especially with COVID, a lot of people weren't spending as much money, and again, we're kind of going into a bit of a recession. People, a lot of economists believe we're heading in the direction of. It's put Golden State in a very awkward position in that Esports was saying they wanted to get involved with, but they never really, because they spend so much on their team. And this is a team that's been for a while. They've had a very high cap. And with, they haven't had the money to put on to Golden Guardians. And that's problematic for a lot of reasons. But I think COVID and then like the beginning of esports winter and even more issues with this luxury tax, I think it's just finally the straw that broke the camel's back, and Golden State's gone basically, look, we love Golden Guardians, we wish we want to do more, but we just cannot fund this. We cannot afford it. We just want to focus on basketball. That's where we're going to just focus. So they're getting out of esports entirely. That's not surprising. A lot of sports groups, especially at the collapse of the Overwatch League, are getting out. They're not all... esports is a lot different than traditional sports. You don't have that hometown hero feel to it. You're more regional based. Teams are a lot smaller. This isn't, an NBA team with like over a dozen players or between the bench and everything, or an NFL team which has has so many players, so many players that you can like build on, and has a history of people coming out to watch it and buy merch. Like esports is newer. It's getting up there. We're by the end of the decade. It'll be over almost 25 years old. We're at about almost the 20-year mark. I'd say for when esports really took off. Granted, there was been early 2000s, 90s, but that's different. That was a different time. That's when you paid people in cars. But esports is not a place that has lots of revenue generating opportunities, and that's always been a struggle for esports. We as gamers, my generation, the generations that are coming after, people that are in esports, don't like spending money. We are cheap. I spend money. I 100% will admit I spend money. I've spent $5,000 at least on League in the 13 years I've been playing this game, almost 14. I've spent a lot of money on other games, but I know, and I spend money on my esports team, but I know I'm the exception to the rule, and people don't like to spend money in esports. And that's, makes it hard to get revenue, which for a team that's already busting almost twice its salary just in attacks alone, is hard to justify then to invest in esports at the same time. And their investments also haven't been that great. Like outside of League, they've been involved in fighting games, which are notorious for not making money. Unless you have like a GOAT player like Mango or Armada who, has the name recognition you can sell off of Daigo, Justin Wong, those kind of people. So not great. Though, to be fair, they never really put much effort into it. This is their website, the Golden Guardians website. I'm actually going to shrink myself a little bit so you can see it a bit better. This is a groundbreaking stuff. This is their front page, their big featured stories. 2021 merch sweepstakes bundle. This is 2 years, almost 3, out of date. That's how little they update, how little goes on there. When they named Nero their manager for there's that. This pivot one is from April. The latest article thing on their website is from April. And that's before we even get to, and this is my big peeve, is the merch. This is something I really despise about Golden Guardians. Their merch is atrocious. And I think that's been a big part of a big problem for why they're struggling financially. At least with orgs like Cloud9, 100 Thieves, TSM, people buy the merch. They do make quite a bit of money off merch. Let's take a look at the merch for Golden Guardians. They actually added an additional item. They added this varsity jacket. Okay, cool. Varsity jacket. This is it. This is 11 items. Some of this has been on there forever. Some of it doesn't make any sense. I don't know what the move is. I think it was part of some campaign they did for fighting games, but it doesn't really connect well. And yeah, so if we just ignore that weird stuff, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces of merch that actually matter. And most of it is Melee related. You also probably couldn't really tell what most of this is about outside of the logo. There's a logoed hat. There's a logoed jersey, which also weirdly has dice on it, which is weird because there's no dicing in any other branding from Golden Guardians except this merch. Like this is the brand, right? That's the logo on the licorice on the pro jersey. What is that? What is that cube? Why is that there? Don't know. Couldn't tell you. So Gold Guardians has not done itself good favors. And that's like, they've been struggling for a while. As we saw a couple weeks ago, they announced that, it was revealed and leaked that they were ceasing operations for the offseason because they didn't have the money for it. I think that was a sign the org was about to come. Like that goal, it was done. For EG, the reason I'm not really talking a lot about EG is because this has been coming. They've been kind of write it as though, we're just going to write it out, and people like myself, we thought they were going to sell. That's like just sell it, and that's how they'd continue, and that's how it would go on. Maybe Mr. Beast buys it, or Moist, or Sentinels, but it's been pretty obvious for a while. EG's going to collapse. So they've just burned every bridge with the community in multiple games. There was the whole fiasco, obviously, with Danny here in League of Legends. That's just made everyone hate them. But even in other games, Valorant, their team won the equivalent of World's Champions. And they tried to get them to take a pay cut and then kept them in contract jail. With CS, they made this huge 12-man roster of like the best talent in NA, and then just like kept sitting on that 12 talent and just kept rotating things, and it didn't work. But then now you have 12 players on the team, and now they all get to play, and other teams that could use that talent and actually be successful couldn't, and things were collapsing, and it's just bad. Like everything going on with EG is bad. The org is dead. It's not like, I don't know if this brand will ever come back again. It's come back before, but like now 2 times it's just killed itself. Like I don't know. It's gone. Like this, it's been pretty obvious that they were going to go down. I'm of the opinion that they were going to get kicked out regardless of whether or not this happened. I think the Riot investigation was going to see them just get dropped for just like, and this is just this option was the option they were going to take, that Riot is going with instead of doing that. Because it's bad a team leaves, but it's worse. I think it's better to say, hey, the org just financially isn't stable. They're exiting esports as a whole, than saying, hey, we kicked this org out because they drove a kid with severe depression and mental health issues, like, to drop out of out of the game. Like, I feel, at least to me, that sounds a lot worse, because it sounds like evil and horror, which Evil Geniuses really lives in the first part of their name. But yeah, it's been obvious for a while they were going to disappear. And, this is bad. Like, it's the league shrinking. It's, it raises the fears of, are these teams going to, like, who's going to collapse next? Could Immortals collapse next? Is ever people going to freak out? Like, oh, these orgs are collapsing, and then investors pull more money, and now more orgs start collapsing. Now it's snowballing in a cascade, and everything collapses, kind of like how soccer happened back in the 70s and the 80s when the NASL collapsed, Cosmos collapsed, and like soccer was set back decades in the U.S. That's a legitimate fear. And also because, there's less bargaining power now next year when Riot tries to go, hey, we want to get 2 more teams, because you can't go, well, this is what we want for these. Like, you can't go for a high price, which I don't think Riot would. They went at 5 to 10, like $6 million in the first place. So I don't expect them to have insane entries, but it's hard to get people to buy into something when you go, wow, these 2 orgs financially collapsed. That's hard. That's really hard to like spin in a positive light, which is kind of what we're about to do. So those are the negatives. Obviously, this is really sad. It's also really sad for the players. Licorice, Spica, Sven were supposedly all lined up to go to Golden Guardians, Young. But yeah, I mean, that's like the biggest, I think, gripe I have with this whole situation is that because they let Riot know just a couple weeks ago, there has been no time to get this. Like they Riot rush as fast as they could, but there's just no time given how the league ecosystem works. Like technically, free agency doesn't start till today, but teams have already got verbal agreements. They've been discussing them for weeks. So the way the sneak around the rules has made it, which wouldn't normally be a problem, is a problem in this situation. So most of these teams, players aren't going to be on enough teams. Granted, it could be like what happened with Licorice originally, and it'd actually be really funny if this worked the other way, where when Licorice was going to be on Cloud9, Cloud9 was going to run it back with the org, and then Riot went, oh, OCE players are now technically native NA players, and then they just immediately went a 180 and dropped him and picked up Fudge. I could see a team going, we're going with this top lane, we can't really afford anything, then suddenly orgs collapse, Licorice is free, there's no buyout or anything. We're there in a more powerful position. Let's go for it. Grab him. Whoever we were going with, screw it. We're going to go Licorice. It would suck for whoever he's replacing, but also it'd be kind of like a sweet justice there that Licorice comes back full circle and manages to get a good part out of that. And yeah, so we're outside the bad. Let's talk about why this isn't. I guess not. It's not that it's good, but that it's not horrid. Like the good parts about this. First and foremost is we're gonna look at history, and I'm not saying that just because I was a history major in college, but the history of sports in the U.S., the LCS follows it very closely. Starting out with a bunch of small teams and a lot of everything kind of being all over the place, and then slowly starts forming into a league, and then eventually becomes a big franchise and then it like blows up. LCS follows that pretty closely, including with like, oh, you've got these orgs that were really strong in the there's the pre and post, like the full franchise system coming out thing. I like to think of it like when the NHL and the AHL, they're not AHL, and it's the AFC and the NFL merged together. And then they became, or AFL, they merged and became the NFL. That's usually considered the beginning of the NFL era. It's when the Super Bowl starts happening and all of that. So that's when we started that considering. And there's a pre and post time. For the LCS, there's pre-franchising and post-franchising. And if you really want, you could divide it to pre-LCS, post-LCS. But I don't think that the pre-era lasted long enough to even be worth talking about just as its own. So looking at traditional sports in the U.S., we're going to start, we'll start with the oldest. We'll start with baseball. Why? Because it's the oldest, and so we have a lot to look at. Baseball has existed in the U.S. since, I don't know, the 1800s, 1860s in weird forms. And it's almost as old as the Civil War. It's pretty old. And, despite being America's pastime, at one point becoming such an insanely big thing, they've lost a lot of teams over the years. I mean, this is the timeline of MLB. You can see teams that just collapsed. The New York Mutuals, Philly Athletics, the St. Louis Brown Stockings, Cincinnati Red Stockings, Syracuse Stars. I think the most recent team, let's see, who collapsed most recently? Probably be the Baltimore Orioles, which became I forgot what they are now. I don't watch baseball. Not the biggest concern in that regard. But yeah, basically, like they've lost a lot. They lost a lot in the early days, and that was over decades. Like it literally was up in the last team to drop out came in. Oh boy, yeah, it was just about just post 1900 was the last time a team actually collapsed. Which is crazy to think about, for baseball. But let's look, that's old stuff. That's way back then, before cars and before planes. But let's look at more modern stuff. We're looking at the NFL. NFL is quite possibly the largest sports league in the world. You could argue between that and Premier League, but the NFL is huge. That doesn't mean they haven't lost a lot of teams over the years. You can see like when they started out in the pre-franchising era before the NFL, they had a lot of teams that would come and disappear after just a couple years. Heck, there were some teams that would die just in the middle of the season. Like the Brooklyn Tigers, the Akron Pros, the Rochester Jeffersons, the Minneapolis Marines. I don't know how many Broncos have we gone through. I think it's been several. The New York Brickley Giants too. The New York Yankees. I know, weird thing to think about. The Yankees were gone. The Buccaneers used to be an LA team, completely unrelated to the modern ones. The Baltimore Colts. There we go. The Colts. That wasn't the Broncos. It was the Colts. The Baltimore Colts existed for a long time, as did the Dallas Texans. Like, even into the 50s, we lost orgs. Heck, technically, we lost one in the 90s because the Browns collapsed and moved to Baltimore and became the Baltimore Ravens, and then had to be completely rebuilt as a new org. So, this is more relatable. Like the early years, even when the NFL really came into being, which was about here, I'd say, in the 60s or right here when they joined, like we still lost the Browns right after that. Like that still happened. So like that, like again, orgs do disappear, especially early on in a franchise. It's not uncommon in American sports, and it's not unheard of for a team just to collapse at the end of a season and just disappear. And heck, I mean, you can still go, hey, it's the 60s, the 50s, like the modern day that doesn't happen. Let's talk about MLS. So the MLS, for those of you who don't know, is the American Soccer League. It's the newest American soccer league. It's been around since 1996. And while it is grown massively, and it is actually pushing its way into the upper echelons of sports, it's not NBA, NFL levels, but it competes with like the NHL and the MLB. It's also gone through ups and downs. It lost two teams in the early 2000s. It lost the Florida teams. It lost the Tampa Bay Mutiny and the Miami Fusion. They both collapsed in 2002. So just 21 years ago. Heck, within the last 10 years, we lost Chivas USA in 2014. It literally, I was in college when that happened. And it just collapsed. For a major U.S. league, for a team to just up and collapse and buy the spot back, like that's insane to think about. But it happened, and it's not like the league was struggling, but there was contractions, like there was a point where there was a bit of struggle. That's why the Tampa Bay and the Fusion collapsed, because the league was struggling. And so they lost $15 million in operating losses. So it does happen, even in leagues that are healthy and long-term are healthy. Still have points where things just go so bad and they have to collapse. Again, even the NFL 90s. The NFL was huge in the 90s. It was never going to disappear once we hit the 90s. Still lost the Browns for a couple years. Had to get new ownership to rebuild the Browns. Like that can happen. And teams still move too. I mean, even in successful leagues, like look at the Raiders. The Raiders moved to Las Vegas from Oakland. Look at the Rams, moved to LA as well. Teams move. And they'll change ownership even decades into a league existing. It could happen still. And I think you'll still see that. I don't think we'll ever be at a point where the LCS, every org is permanent forever and ever. There will be a point where orgs will sell out, even 10 years from now, when the LCS is still going, which I do believe it will. Still gonna have issues. There'll be still teams that are selling. 100 Thieves or Immortals, or someone will sell probably, or move, or rebrand, or something will happen. But yeah, and I know some people go, well, that's different. These are like struggling orgs. They're not championship orgs. Champion orgs don't collapse. And EG won a championship. Golden Guardians has come so close. Like, how can such successful orgs collapse? Well, you have a history in North American sports that too. Looking at hockey in the Stanley Cup, the first ever U.S. winner of the Stanley Cup, the Seattle Metropolitans, collapsed within 7 years of winning their title. And there wasn't a Seattle hockey team for 100 years. Literally, we didn't get the Kraken until about 2-3 years, like about 3 years ago at this point. So it's like almost 100 years they were gone. Like, and they won. They were the first U.S. team to win the Stanley Cup, like the most long-lasting, prestigious trophy in U.S. sports, and just, I mean, in North American sports, and possibly all of sports. It is just gone. They didn't exist. The Vancouver Millionaires, they don't exist. The Toronto Hockey Club, I don't think that still exists unless they rebranded. No, they didn't. So they're gone too. Yeah. Like these teams disappear. Winning teams will disappear. So yeah, like that's just, it's bad, but it still follows the trend of other sports. And these sports, like especially MLS, like MLS is probably the best example that you can follow along because they have very similar trajectories. They reach a very similar audience, a young audience, new generation looking for their sport. But now, after that like kind of decline, that slight decline as they slowly were kind of re-expanding back out. Let's see. Also, don't forget San Jose Earthquakes disappeared for a bit and had to come back. They were moved to Houston. I almost forgot about that. Oh my goodness. So the wording I'm looking for. So like it's not on this like this. It's not. This isn't anything crazy that's going on. Like this has happened. League's just newer. We're an audience that isn't used to this. I mean, again, like the last team to collapse in a major league was Chivas, and that was at the beginning of league's like ascension. So a lot of people probably don't remember it here, or just didn't know, like haven't lived through these, but they happened. And again, like it follows MLS similarly. Like that's where I was going originally. It follows it similarly. So I think after this, we'll see growth. I think this year upcoming year be smaller. I think the restructuring will help. I'll have to see what the plans are for that. I mean, they could up and just make it horrible, but I assume they're not going to. We're going to assume the positives opposed to the negatives, but I think we'll see growth. I think after this, when it boosts back up to 10, I think we'll see the new blood will inject a lot of interest. I think we'll see leagues start to pick up. We're also approaching the point now where people that started playing league and were there from the beginning, getting old enough that they have kids, and their kids are starting to get old enough that they are getting interested in league. So I think we'll start to see a surge. I think before the end of the decade, we will see a resurgence, and we'll see the LCS in a much better position than it was. I think before then, we'll still see an order to maybe 3 even, kind of shaky on 100 Thieves based on what I know about their spending. At least rumored last year they were spending $15 million, I think, a month on their rosters. I mean, on their as an org, like in operating expenses. So, at least according to sources familiar with it, I may have misbe remembering it. I just remember it was a metric ton of money, and I was shocked that was being spent monthly. That could have changed. Don't quote me on that. Please don't quote me on that. I am not someone renowned for having a great memory. So, for anyone that knows me, like the greatest memory for exact details. But I think we could see a couple more orgs like Dig, Immortals, 100 Thieves kind of fall off and get replaced. But I don't see the LCS collapsing. I don't think the LCS is going to collapse. I don't think it's dying. I think it's just hit this weird slump. We're in a weird slump between a lot of things happening. We're in an esport tech winter. We're at the point in the game's life cycle where the original audience has kind of grown up, the kids under them were like, that's what the lane, they're old people playing. We're the new gen. We're gonna play something different and cool, but is approaching that next cycle where the following generation has the nostalgia and goes, oh, look at this. This is my parents played. This is actually kind of cool. I want to play it. But like between that next generation, between the struggles of the economy and tech and esports as a whole, between the post-COVID, like everyone wants to be outdoors, no one really wants to be inside gaming and doing other stuff. I think it's a perfect storm of things that are hurting, but I think the LCS can weather it. Again, though, this is just my opinion. I hope this information wasn't too convoluted and gave you some things to think about. I hope you learned something here, or you got some interesting ideas from this. But let me know what you think. Message me here, message me on Twitter, X, whatever the hell Elon's calling it now. X is a horrible name. But yeah, let me know what you think. Do you think the LCS is going to stay around? Do you think, those 3 orgs I thought were going to disappear are going to disappear? Do you think the changes, the restructuring will be enough? Let me know. I'd love to debate it, love to talk about it. I might make more videos like this in the future. I don't know. Now that things have settled at my venue, I've got more time to make these kind of things. I have an interest. I used to do the podcast and stuff. So, I might do more of these. But signing off for the night, and I'll catch y'all later.